Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show, and every week I talk to interesting and creative and successful CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies and organizations, ranging from Netflix to Kinko's to YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard. Go check out our archives. Lots of great episodes there. I'm also the co-founder of Rise25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And my guest this week, David C. Baker. He is an author, a speaker, an advisor to entrepreneurial creatives worldwide, written 5 books, advised 900 firms. He's a bit of a slouch. Let's be honest. Keynoted conferences in 30 different countries. Work has been featured in Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, Forbes, USA Today, Businessweek, Inc. magazine. He's based in Nashville, Tennessee. His most recent book is The Business of Expertise: How Entrepreneurial Experts Convert Insight to Impact and Wealth. And David, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. I'm excited to dive into some of these different topics with you because it's been such a roller coaster ride these last 18 months. We're recording this in October 2021. And, I want to start with you by going back to March of 2020, which is seared in all of our brains at the beginning of the pandemic. Right. And it was such a pivotal turning point for so many entrepreneurial creative firms and agencies, but maybe not in the way that they thought. It actually turned out to be a positive for, at least for most of those agencies that are doing anything in the digital realm. But what did you think? I'd love to climb into your brain and know what you thought when the proverbial SHIT started to hit the fan in March of 2020. What were you thinking?
Oh, I remember I was keynoting a conference in New Orleans with some friends and with my podcast co-host, and this was in February. Nobody was wearing any masks. We kind of heard of things happening in different places. None of us were really worried, but it was kind of an interesting topic. And then we get back, and then I went to work in New York City with a client, and the day I was there was the first confirmed case. I got back here early March. I worked with a client that flew in here, the first confirmed case in the Nashville area. And I remember thinking, okay, this could be serious. And I remember sending a text message to my 2 kids. I didn't even include my wife or my daughters-in-law. I just said, all right, I've done some calculations. I think possibly between 100 and 250,000 people will die. But even that seems so surreal. I just couldn't picture that. And I didn't want to be embarrassed, and I didn't want to alarm anybody, so I just sent it to them. I had no idea it would be way more than that. But in March, I'm not a very nervous person, but I was nervous. I thought, well, this has been a fantastic ride. I've been doing this for 25 plus years.
And
now, and it's over. Like, this is not the ending I imagined, because I was in some new country or city every week doing something before this. And of course, everything stopped. And it was 6 weeks, but I'd been through earlier times where things like this have happened. And I thought, oh, we'll probably get through it. We'll probably figure it out. Then it kept going. And then I was like, the last thing I need to be is bored. So I decided to do free webinars for 1,000 people at a time, just trying to talk them off the ledge, tell them to not do stupid stuff. Right.
And at that point, did you feel confident talking people off the ledge? Had your confidence restored?
Yes. For the firms that were run well, absolutely. I expected that about 30% of firms would fail, which was not a good projection. Not nearly. It turned out to be a much better year than I was anticipating. But I was very confident in what I was telling them. I wasn't confident that all of them would make it.
And obviously things changed as the situation evolved. And what ended up happening was more companies realizes that they needed to make changes, and they made investments. And what was that like? Take us through, 2020, the spring of 2020, as you started to see companies you've worked with start to get busy.
Yeah, it was so crazy because normally when you're advising somebody in a professional setting, or you're talking to a kid or a friend, you're saying, you really ought to think about this. And they're thinking, why? And you're saying, well, maybe this will happen. And they're just looking at you like, oh, that's not going to happen, right? But here we have the world changing right in front of us. And so it accelerated all of the revisioning that people had to do about their firms. And they had to think about everything. And so I was encouraging them to just rip the Band-Aid off. Don't be hesitant about the deep changes that need to be made. And so almost all of the changes that people made during that time ended up being really good ones that they should have been doing anyway, right? There were a couple of little things that slipped under the radar, like they took a few clients that probably weren't a great fit because they felt desperate. But other than that, they were making the kind of decisions they should have made anyway. Like the work from home thing, right? Most of these firms in this industry, they all work together in the same place. That's part of the shtick. It's like, how do we be creative? We're together. That's part of it. And then when they couldn't do that, they had to rethink the whole thing. And now all of a sudden they're thinking, oh, maybe this isn't so bad. So it compressed all the change at one point. But meanwhile, it compressed all that change in a populace that hated each other, that was terrified, they didn't trust people. So it was sort of an agonizing year for people, in spite of all the great business results that they weren't necessarily expecting. They were thinking about, it was like being on vacation forever, but with no ability to go anywhere. And it just wasn't very good on people's psyches. So we don't need any more upheaval for a while. I think we just need time to get used to the way things are generally. I mean, it's not great for not even thinking about all the death, but in terms of the businesses themselves, some businesses are doing really badly. The businesses in the segment that I serve are doing really well. The best they've done probably since, 7, 8 years, something like that.
Wow. Amazing. And what is it? Let's focus on the ones that are doing really well. What is it about the decisions that they made, maybe without even anticipating that these are good decisions, but how did they set themselves up for success? If you look back on it now, was it the fact that they were remote, or that they had the ability to be remote, or was it the fact that they were embracing digital? What were the things that were the underlying themes that made them successful now?
I think it starts with the panic that everybody was feeling about new business. And so they didn't all have the right answers, but they all were listening for them differently. And that forced a lot of firms to realize, hey, I can't build a marketing plan on top of this positioning. This business strategy is too similar to everybody else out here. I'm going to need a different one. So that was a really good benefit of all of this. And the people who were willing to make tough choices that required courage and then build a marketing plan on top of it, that has a direct connection with the firms that are doing well. I think, too, a lot of the results, the success comes from not what they did in the pandemic, but what they did before the pandemic in terms of running a business with strong fundamentals. So they had enough of a cash cushion. They had a strong management environment where the people trusted what was happening and didn't just discount it right away. And then I think the other area would be service offerings. They, instead of just expanding service offerings, they doubled down on the most important ones. And so they transitioned, say, away from traditional towards digital. You see so many firms that the biggest shift in positioning is towards e-commerce, which obviously has a lot to do with what was happening in the economy at large. So they made a lot of really good decisions in all of this. Some of them hung on to people too long, but it's hard to fault them for something that's motivated for the right reasons.
And I want to ask about that piece. Labor, because that's one of the ripple effects is the labor shortage that a lot of companies are experiencing. But before we get to that, I want to ask about companies that did have to pivot because it turns out they were in the wrong niche, serving the wrong clientele. Maybe they're serving restaurants,
right.
or
hotels.
or maybe they were doing, marketing collateral that goes at conferences or something like that.
Right.
How did these companies pivot when they pivoted well, and what did you advise them for those pivots?
Well, the firms that were focused very heavily on the areas in the economy that were hit, so like travel, tourism, restaurants, hotels, airlines, they just abandoned that wholesale and their business, and they had to lay off a lot of people. They dropped about half of their revenue. Some of them were able to pivot really quickly away from it and are even wondering if they should go back to it now that it's getting stronger there. But there is a very small percentage of firms that were hit that hard. The ones that were in those spaces, they were devastated. Everybody else pretty much figured out like, oh, okay, we're not doing the big sales show in Las Vegas every year, but we still have to have a big sales meeting. Let's figure out how to do it in other ways. And the revenue came, it was just doing different things than they were used to doing. Yeah.
And now, how much of this, you had a business before, Utilis was the name of it, which had a client concentration problem, in your words, where you had too much revenue coming from a small concentration of clients. And so you kind of had a tough ride there. But put it in your words, what that experience was like, and then how that colored the experience of going through this and advising companies that were experiencing something similar.
Yeah, it's hard for me to think back and remember all the good decisions I made in running an earlier business. Could be that there weren't many, right? That's possible.
Well, sometimes the bad ones are the ones that stick with you, maybe.
Yeah, right. So I have learned so much more from my bad decisions than from my good decisions. Maybe I just need to make more good ones, but and so the value of money, the value of positioning, the value of a marketing plan, the value of managing people right, not making bad hiring mistakes. And one of the biggest lessons that is still with me from almost 30 years ago now was having an agency of 16 people and having one client that represented 40% of our billings. And they were a great client in many ways. But I discovered accidentally that our client contact was embezzling from his firm. Oh. And
You discovered this?
I discovered it, yeah.
Wow.
I didn't know what to do. I'd like to say that I immediately called the company up and turned them in, but I didn't. I thought about it for a couple of days, figuring out what the best thing to do was. And that is what I did. I turned them in, thinking that the company would be very grateful and maybe even give us more work to do, right? Right. That's not what happened. So, wow. And I wasn't prepared for the devastation of losing a 40% account overnight, essentially. And I remember borrowing $300 and some thousand from my father-in-law, which, by the way, is never a great idea. Wow. Because you do have to pay it back, right? And I paid it back in about a year and a half or so, which is quite fast for a small firm like that. But I'll never forget the pressures you feel from not managing the change that could happen to you. And so that influences, decades later now, it still influences how I think about things.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some ways in which it continues to color your decisions today, or the way that you view the chaos that we've been through over the last year and a half?
Well, in some ways it makes me a lot bolder. In other ways, it makes me more grateful for what I have, because I do feel, sort of like a year and a half ago, I do feel like at any point the business can be pulled out from under you. No matter how successful any of us is, we're about 2 stupid decisions away from losing everything in the business. So
is that a good thing, or is that a bad thing? It's funny, the way you describe it, I can't tell. Maybe a little bit of both.
I think it's a good thing, because I don't want to get cocky. Like I have a remarkable business right now. If I let that go to my head, then I'm not going to be afraid of, I'll just not think very carefully about things. And I also don't want to think that my current success is anything but a mix of intelligence and discipline and a whole lot of being in the right place at the right time. There is just, if you pull that out of the equation, my business wouldn't look like it does at all right now. Yeah. And I just always want that in front of my mind. But I also feel like there's sort of an anti-fragility in our businesses. The longer we do this, the more we figure, we'll figure it out. There's something that's coming, right? And it comes down to sort of a fundamental notion I have about entrepreneurship, in that we start often for the right reasons, not always, but then we lose sight of those things. So we start a business because we're ultimately unemployable. We finally come to that realization. It's like we're the worst employees in the world. We can't have a boss anymore. And that's the main one. Then there's other ones like, I'd like to make more money. I'd like to have more control. I'd like to have a better work-life balance. So we start this thing, we're all excited. It usually goes well. And then a few years later, you stop and you look back and you realize, wait a second, I'm making less money than I did and I've got more financial risk. I'm working longer hours. I don't have as much control. I feel like I'm feeding a machine. And that's that slow transition where the business begins to own you, and you don't have that sort of freedom because you are always one or two steps behind the business. You're catching up. You're like, oh, I got to do this. Like, instead of planning ahead and shaping it very directly. What happened last year is that the world shook our businesses up and said, it's dead in the water. What are you going to do about it? There was no choice we had, right? And success is what keeps us from more success more than anything. It's like things are going good enough. And so we don't have those deep moments of wanting to affect some change in our businesses. So all that, I don't even remember what your question was now. I'm just ranting, but it's just.
Well, it started with Utilis and kind of the ways in which going through that experience, losing 40% colors the experience of today.
Right.
That's where we started.
Look at I don't know a lot about your business, but you're well known. You're interviewing great people, intelligent people. If you wake up and you hate your business, it's like something's got to give, because you have an amazing business in an amazing country and you're making money and you have all kinds of, it's like we got to realize what we have and we've got to protect it, right? But not preserve it, but protect it by planning more and being willing to change and constantly realizing that, hey, David, what got you to this place, John, what got you to this place is not the same thing that's going to get you to the next place. So always be willing to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. So true. So true. And the healthy paranoia, I think, is kind of a phrase that some people use. Right. I think that can be a good thing. I do want to ask you about hiring, recruiting, labor, staff retention. It's such a big topic these days. What are you seeing these days? We're in October 2021. What are you seeing and how that is affecting the market?
I'm seeing that is a big issue, just like you said. I just wrote an email to the tens of thousands of principals that get my weekly emails. And I just said, listen, your biggest problem is not finding clients. Your biggest problem is finding good people. And then your second biggest problem is how to pay them well enough. It's hard. There are a lot of experienced creatives available, but you need a software engineer, a coder. You may have to pay $75,000 for somebody out of school who isn't even that good, right? So it is a big issue. Let me insert an idea that maybe your listeners will find interesting. So a lot of my career has been spent helping people fashion the right positioning and then building a marketing plan on top of that. I kind of think that finding great clients is not as hard as finding great team members. So why don't we instead focus on building a marketing plan for our team members? And the positioning for that is the culture that you've built and the clients you have and the work you do and the systems and processes. So I'm asking people to think differently about new business and think more about new employees and to have an actual marketing plan for new employees. Maybe you do a podcast that is not directed at your target audience, but it's directed at future possible employees of yours. Have all kinds of guests on there, talk about career path issues and how to manage up with your boss. And, there's 100 topics you could talk about. And then at the end of it, whenever you have an opening, say, by the way, at Blue Search, we're hiring for such and such. And then you have 1,000 people who are already attracted to the way you think and the way you do things. Because I think what's going to hold you back from succeeding like you could will not be clients, it will be team and management.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea, and I think that's a great benefit of doing a podcast. You could focus it on that for sure. What
Do you
other?
know anybody? Do you know anybody that does podcasts for people? Do you know anybody that does that?
I might know a
You
few.
might. Okay.
Yeah. So if only there was someone who could help me to put this together. I have no idea.
Rise
Exactly.
24, or
Rings a
was it
bell.
25? Yeah.
Something. Well, I want to ask you about aside from that, the labor shortage. What else is your eye on these days? How else? What are the ripple effects do you see now and going into 2022?
Yeah, a huge one is the whole work from home thing and how that will impact. So how that will impact compensation in particular. So in the past, you would see a salary survey for every firm, and it would say, okay, if you're this position and you live in New York City, it's this. This is your expected pay. If it's Des Moines, it's this, right? Well, none of that matters anymore because to whatever extent people can work anywhere, the decision they're making about where to live is not anything that the owner has control over. So they're going to say, listen, I pay this for this position. You live wherever you want. That's something we haven't quite figured out yet. The other is just thinking about the whole service offering side of things. What we've done a little bit in panic in the professional services space is we have made our service offering choices look a little bit too much like the Cheesecake Factory menu, where you have 30 pages and it's like it takes you all. You need a couple of appetizers just to read the whole thing. Yeah. And instead of a price fix, or however you pronounce that, right, where we are and there's a difference in terms of how most of my clients and most of your clients are not in the service business, they're in the expertise business. And in an expertise business, it's your job. If you don't do this, it's malpractice. It's your job to lead the client the right way and tell them what they need and then do it graciously and well. And so some of this service offering design stuff has looked a little bit too much like a buffet where we're just letting clients pick and choose. And because of that, they don't really experience us in the way they should. We don't have control over results. So those are the big themes I'm seeing nowadays.
Yeah. And you made the point in one of your recent podcast episodes where you kind of dovetailing on what you just said, that you'll get fired for not providing that expertise to the clients. Like not only are you expected to, but it's malpractice if you don't provide that expertise.
Because they're going to find another one when you quit thinking from scratch. When you start just mailing it in, then that's their clue. They need to find another firm. So you need to be leading them all the way through the relationship.
Yeah. And then what about changing? I guess there's a question about technologies and new mediums. Is your eye on any of those sorts of things, how that's affecting the world? I'm constantly thinking about that because obviously we do podcasts and I love new media. I love new emerging markets. Right. Is that something that that you're noticing is having a big impact on it?
It could. It's not as fast as we suspect often. I forget when the whole Clubhouse craze thing came out, right? I started to do a bunch of stuff on there, and I think I have 3,000 followers or something, and I'll pop on sometimes and just start something new, and I'll get a whole bunch of people that apparently have nothing else to do in life, and they're talking with me, and then none of them are going to be prospects. I get discouraged, and I go on. I don't think there's a radical difference in technology there. It's just getting more complicated, and we're starting to figure it out a little bit better. And some of the older methodologies are coming back in. An example of that would be, so we pretty much dismiss direct mail, because we usually we know exactly all the tricks and we just toss it as soon as we get it. But it still is pretty darn effective. And when you mesh direct mail with some digital marketing, you can do some things that you can't do with just one or the other. And so I think as an industry, we're learning how to weave the right mediums into the picture in a smarter way rather than just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. However, the promise that now that so much is digital would lead us to clear attribution is simply not happening. 40 years ago, somebody said, I think it was the famous copywriter who said, Only half of what I do is effective. Problem is, I don't know which half. And supposedly, we weren't supposed to be suffering from that now. It would be very clear what we needed to do. The truth isn't that at all. It's just more complicated. We still need a lot of instinct. But we still don't know much about marketing, which is why there are thousands of books about marketing trying to tell us something.
Right. There's a new one all the time. Speaking of that, not that you were to write another book, but if you were to write another book, and I certainly don't want to break any news here, if you were to write another book, what sorts of thoughts would you share in that book?
Yeah. Well, I have written another book that's ready to go if I can get the courage to release it. And it's really about the trade craft of consulting. And it makes me nervous because it's a lot of sort of inside secrets for the consulting world. I think it's probably worth writing and releasing. I was nervous with the expertise book, my fifth one, and it turned out to be received well.
What makes you nervous about releasing this other one?
Because people will now see the secrets of consulting as I work with them. They'll read it in the book and they'll say, oh, now I know why he's doing that, right? And it's not manipulation at all. It's just the way to be more effective. And sometimes I think the mystery is useful. So that's what makes me nervous about it. I would actually love to see if I could write a a fiction book. I've never have, and I don't think I have. I don't know. I have no idea whether I can do it well. I've started one, but that's what I would love to do. I'm in a weird place as an author because I hate business books, and I always have, and I don't like to read them, even though I do. And I think most of them should be magazine articles instead of full books. So I just get really hard on myself when I'm writing a book. It's like, do I really need to include this, or should I really charge this much money for this book? Is this really useful? But every book I've written has been even better for me than the last one. Not so much because of the reception, because they're not famous books. They've done well, but they're not that famous. More just because it forces me to spend time with the topic and figure out what I think. And then I see that all that time I spent kind of bubbling up in other things, and it's just like opening one room, like my podcast partner and friend says, Blair ends all the time. There's one door and you're not sure what's in there, and you're not sure you want to go in there because everything here I know and like, and that's a new thing. And you get in there and you don't realize it till you're in there, but there's all kinds of new doors and windows in there, and you never get tired of the exploration, excuse me. So that's I love the process of but writing a book feels a little bit like diving into an empty pool and inventing water on the way down. Like once you start it, you know you got to finish it, and it's going to be very, very painful, and you're going to have time run out, and then you're done with it, and you're so grateful you swear you'll never do another one, and then sure enough you do another one.
I've heard so many authors say that, this is my last book, I'm never going to do it again, and then 6 months later I'm interviewing them for their next book. This has been great. I want to ask you before we wrap up, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you about your podcast, which is super popular. But you have a distinctive style. It's a two-person conversation.
Right.
How do you keep on coming up with ideas and also the motivation too? I mean, aren't you sick of talking to Blair by now? Oh,
you have no idea. Yeah. The only reason we keep being successful is because I carry most of it. No, that's not true. So and I wish, not many people realize there aren't guests on it. And I wish all the pitches I got realized that, because I usually have fun with them. That somebody wants to be on the show and I'll say, oh, no problem. Tell me which of the guests you were really drawn to. And then they'll spend hours and discover there's no guest. All the podcasts I listen to have guests, so I'm not against that format. I love that format. We just felt like we have enough going on and we know enough about this field that we could probably come up with enough topics. There have been a few times when we've thought, oh, I'm not sure, what are we going to talk about next? But most of the time we have tons of topics. I think it's been 120 episodes. And the key to us is that we know each other well, we serve the same field, and we can make stuff up. So we don't practice. It's just a 3-paragraph thing like, hey, Blair, interview me on this today. And I'll send him those 3 paragraphs and it just happens. And we're just committed to sort of being ourselves. We never do a second take of it. We don't do any heavy editing. And if people begin to not enjoy it, then we'll just stop it. But we're not going to do it if it takes a lot of work. So it takes about 10 minutes of prep, 30 minutes to record it, 35 minutes, and then we drop it in a Dropbox folder. Our producer, Marcus DePaula, takes it from there, and we never think about it. So the return on investment, you didn't ask this question. I mean, it doesn't cost us much in terms of money or time to do. I have never in my life done something that has been more influential than that podcast. Wow. It is rare, and I'm not saying that it's because of the quality of the podcast. It's because it's the medium itself. Now, the audio needs to be great, need to be articulate, need to be interesting, all that stuff I understand. But it's very rare for me to talk with any prospect for my consulting business that hasn't been listening to this thing regularly. When it was Blair's idea to do it, and I kind of went along with it because I like him, we're friends. I didn't think much would come of it, but I have just been blown away at how it has impacted my business. I'm not a client of yours. You didn't ask me to say that. I just think it's just pretty amazing. And I've got about 15 clients doing them as well, and they would all testify to that. One of the secret wonderful things about podcasts is it is an excuse for you to call people who would otherwise never take your call and ask them to be a guest on your podcast. Absolutely. And then if you treat it respectfully and there really is a guest, you're not trying to pitch them, the goodness sort of flows to you. So I love the podcast. I actually listen to every episode too and just kind of cringe or laugh as we go through it. Oh,
wow. You listen to your episodes?
I do, yeah. I'm thinking, that was funny. I was really good.
I burn it to the ground. I do not want to listen to that.
There are times when I'd say, oh, David, I can't believe you thought that was funny. Why did you say that?
Yeah, that one I have not done. I've listened to some of them, but very rarely.
So I've listened to more of yours than you have. That's
pretty
funny.
much. Yeah, that's pretty much the case. Well, David, this has been a pleasure. I want to wrap up with my last question. I'm a big fan of gratitude. So, if you look around at your peers and contemporaries, however you want to define that, it could be, heads of different entrepreneurial firms. Who do you respect? Who do you admire that's doing good work these days?
It's so hard to choose that because I have so many candidates for that, but I'd have to say probably Mark O'Brien at newfangled.com. He was an intern at that firm when I first started to work for them as an advisor, and he actually ended up buying the firm for millions of dollars later. And the way he manages it and the people side and the service product mix and his attention to financial metrics and marketing plan, it's just like a seminar on how to run a business. And I don't know all the details of it, but that would be one for sure, the newfangled.com people.
Excellent. And then, just for anyone listening to this who's thinking, I could certainly use his help. What types of work are you doing with clients these days? How are you helping them?
So I only work with firms in the marketing, digital, and creative space, and I do M&A work. I also do a total business reset thing where we look at all different 6 key elements of their firm and help them from top to bottom. Or if people just want to start really small, they can get, without any cost, they can just get the weekly emails, or if they want to get the book, that'd be cool too.
Excellent. All right. Excuse me, David, such a pleasure. Thanks so much for
Thank you for having me too. Okay. I appreciate it. It was really fun.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution. Revolution. And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.